Car culture. It's not just about horsepower or lap times or quarter-mile runs. It's about the people. It's about freedom, rebellion, identity, and community. Cars have been everything from status symbols to toys to weapons to political statements. They've been family road trip machines or giant burnout monsters or $500 projects that only start when they feel like it. And over the last 70 years, car culture has evolved massively. Every single decade had its own flavor, its own attitude, its own set of cars that defined it. So today we're going decade by decade through the history of car culture. From the hot rods of the 50s to the muscle cars of the 60s to the tuner scene of the 90s to the influencer builds of today. By the end, I think you'll see that car culture is not dying, it's just changing like it always has. Let's jump into it. The 1950s were the birth of car culture as we know it. World War II had just ended. Soldiers came home with mechanical skills from fixing planes, tanks, and jeeps. They knew how to wrench, they knew how to improvise, and they wanted speed. At the same time, the US economy was booming. People had disposable income, highways were being built, and cars were dirt cheap. Old Fords and Chevys could be picked up for next to nothing. So what did young people do? They stripped them down, ditched the heavy body panels, bolted on bigger carbs, and started racing each other. That was the hot rod era. The 1932 Ford Deuce Coupe became the ultimate canvas. Chopped, lowered, flames painted on the side with leftover house paint, it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was fast. And suddenly cars weren't just appliances, they were freedom, they were rebellion. They were the thing that let you escape your small town on a Friday night and maybe impress that girl at the diner. Car meets started here, not official ones, but gatherings in empty parking lots, drag races on quiet roads, and weekends at the drag strip. And while parents and politicians called it dangerous, for young people, cars were everything. If the 50s were about home-built hot rods, the 60s were about Detroit realizing, wait a second, why don't we sell kids fast cars? And they did, and thus the muscle car era began. The Pontiac GTO, the Ford Mustang, the Chevy Camaro, the Dodge Charger, these weren't just cars, they were weapons. Affordable factory-built machines that anyone with a paycheck could buy. It didn't matter if you were a teenager working at a gas station or a dad of 3. You could walk into a dealership and roll out in something with a big block V8 that could roast tires for days. Woodward Avenue in Detroit became a legendary street racing strip. Kids would cruise all night, race light to light, and show off who had the meanest exhaust note. The 60s were pure excess. Cars got bigger, engines got louder, and the horsepower wars got crazier. It was basically Pokemon, but instead of gotta catch them all, it was gotta smoke them all. But even here you start to see the first cracks. Insurance companies started jacking up rates. The government started looking into safety and emissions. Still, for the 1960s, car culture was at its loudest, wildest, and maybe most fun. Then came the 70s, and oh boy, if the 60s were a party, the 70s were the hangover. In 1973, the oil crisis hit. Gas prices went through the roof, there was rationing, shortages, and suddenly nobody wanted to drive a 7-liter V8 that got 8 miles a gallon. And on top of that, the government cracked down on emissions and safety. Seatbelts became mandatory, catalytic converters showed up, smog laws strangled horsepower. Muscle cars that once made 400 horsepower suddenly made 160. Imagine buying a Corvette with numbers worse than a modern minivan. That's the 70s. Car culture split in two. Some people gave up and started buying little eco boxes. Others resisted, modifying whatever they could and keeping the performance spirit alive in garages and back alleys. This is also when Japanese imports started creeping in. Cars like the Toyota Corolla and Honda Civic showed up. They weren't fast, but they were cheap, reliable, and sipped fuel. It was a culture shock. Imagine going from a 400 horsepower Chevelle to a Pinto. That's not just a downgrade, that's a cry for help. The 80s changed everything. Detroit was still stumbling, but Japan was heating up. Cars like the Toyota AE86, the Nissan 300ZX, the Mazda RX-7, and the Honda CRX weren't about brute horsepower. They were about balance, handling, lightweight fun. This is the decade where tuner culture was born. Instead of buying a big V8, young enthusiasts bought small, cheap cars and modified them. Turbos, suspension, body kits, stereos, the aftermarket exploded. And while the import scene was bubbling, the 80s were also about pop culture cars. Think about it. Knight Rider's kit, Magnum PI's Ferrari, Back to the Future's DeLorean. Cars weren't just machines, they were celebrities. By the late 80s, Japanese automakers were starting to dominate. Detroit still had muscle, but Japan had precision. And the groundwork was being laid for what was coming next. If the 80s planted the seeds, the 90s were the harvest. This is when Japan went all in. The Skyline GTR, the Supra, the NSX, the RX-7, the Evo, STI, these weren't just cars, they were legends. And the world noticed. Video games like Gran Turismo, anime like Initial D, movies, car magazines, suddenly kids who grew up playing Need for Speed were obsessed with JDM cars. Drifting was born in Japan, led by Kishi Tsukiya, the Drift King. Street racing imports in the US started embarrassing old V8 muscle. A Civic hatchback with a turbo could leave a Camaro wondering what just happened. And while muscle cars still existed, the 90s belonged to imports. There's nothing scarier to a Mustang owner in 1998 than a kid in a backwards hat driving a turbo Civic. music. This was a cultural shift. Car culture wasn't just America anymore, it was global. Then came 2001. The Fast and the Furious hit theaters and car culture went mainstream overnight. Suddenly, everyone wanted neon underglow, giant wings, body kits, and nitrous. Street racing wasn't just something that you heard about, it was Hollywood. Car meets blew up, parking lots were packed, import versus domestic debates raged, and while some of it was pure style over substance, the culture was alive like never before. At the same time, online car communities started. Forums, early YouTube channels, how-to guides. You could share builds with people across the globe. Were some mods questionable? Absolutely. Half the 2000s were sponsored by Pep Boys and questionable taste, but you can't deny it, it was fun. By the 2010s, car culture shifted again. YouTube blew up. Channels like Hoonigan, Mighty Car Mods, and countless others made car content more accessible than ever. Instagram became a flex zone for stance build, camber cars, and show cars. Car culture split into tribes. Track guys, drift guys, stance show guys, drag racers, and in every corner the internet amplified it. Meanwhile, cars themselves were changing. Turbocharged 4s making 300 horsepower, dual clutch gearboxes, factory performance so good you barely had to mod anything. And then came Tesla. Electric cars entered the conversation, and suddenly the definition of performance started to change. Which brings us to today, the 2020s. Car culture is splintered. Traditional enthusiasts still love their muscle cars, their JDM imports, their tuner builds, but a new generation is growing up on EVs, on Tesla drag races, on viral TikToks of takeovers and donuts and intersections. Cars are more expensive than ever, insurance is brutal, governments are cracking down on noise emissions and street racing, and yet car culture is alive. It's at cars and coffee meets, it's at drift events, it's in sim racing communities online, it's in the kid who buys a beat-up Miata and learns to wrench. Half of car culture today begins in the parking lot. The other half happens in Forza, and that's alright. So here's the truth, car culture has never been about the cars. In the 50s it was hot rods, in the 60s muscle cars, in the 90s JDM legends, in the 2000s neon and nitrous. Today it's a mix of everything. The tools change, the trends change, the cars change, but the people and the passion, that never changes. Car culture is not dying, it's just evolving the same way it always has. And if history has shown us anything, it's that no matter what happens, people will always find a way to make cars fun. If you want to know more about car culture, check out my channel, I have a video on it. I appreciate you guys so much for watching. Hit that sub button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.